I'm Rima and I have a question for you. Now, how many times have you heard someone say something like, act your age, it doesn't suit you otherwise? Well, there's loads of people in this world who defy that rule. They don't act their age, and those are the ones that we call childish adults. Welcome to today's lesson, and today's lesson is all about words used to describe childish adults. Now, all adults at some point or the other behave like children, like kids, and it's good to do so sometimes, once in a while, because it's nice to treasure the child within you. So when you're behaving like a child, irrespective of your age, these are the words you can use to describe yourself or someone else who's doing the same thing. So I have in my list choicest of terms, and I'm going to start off with the first one, which I think is very, very familiar to almost everyone. It's mama's boy. Now, how many times have you heard a full-grown man being described as a mama's boy? I think many, many times. And it actually means overly dependent on your mother. Now, the closeness of boy children to their moms is legendary, but once a boy grows up into a full-grown man, if he's still calling his mom for every tiny thing and taking all his decisions with or without the approval of his mother, then he happens to be termed as mama's boy. And trust me, women don't dig mama's boys. Well, moving on to the next one. Now, this one's for the girls, daddy's girl. Okay, so daddy's girl is someone who just adores her father so much that her father has the final word on everything. She idolizes him, she wants to be like him, she wants to do things just the way he does it. So daddy's girl is someone for whom her father is an ideal. So daddy can do no wrong. He's absolutely perfect for a daddy's girl. So there's lots of women, and they could be in their 40s, their 50s, but some of them are still daddy's girls. Well, moving on, the next term. Now this one is not a very positive one. Cry baby, someone who cries at the drop of a hat. So that would be someone who cries too easily. So if you have a friend or a colleague or a sister or someone who just cries at the drop of a hat, someone who just is like, waiting to tear up at every occasion, now that person can be termed as a crybaby. And this one is never really used in a positive light. It's always used in a very negative light to kind of show that the person's weak or does not practice the required emotional control. So if I have a friend who cries too much, I'm going to say, don't be such a crybaby, or you're always such a crybaby, and this is not a very appreciative or positive term. So that's crybaby for you. And moving on, the next one, this is fidget. Now, fidget can be a little confusing. It actually means someone who's restless or moves continuously. So if you have someone who just can't sit still, has to get up, has to shake his feet, has to shake his hand, well, that person can be termed as a fidget. So I could say something like, he's such a fidget, he can't sit still for a single second. And that person would be the most restless person on the face of this planet. Or you could attribute the term fidget to someone who moves continuously. So if there's somebody who's always job jumping or always moving houses, you could say, you're such a fidget, you can't stay still in a job for like longer than a month. And that's the meaning of the word fidget. And that's also something you call children, because children are generally restless. They're always moving from one toy to another, dropping things, shaking their hands, shaking their feet, and all of the above. So, well, a child is mostly very fidgety. So an adult who's behaving like a child is termed as a fidget. I'm moving on to the next one, and this one is kiddish. Now this one's really simple because kiddish is someone who's just acting childish. Now, if you know of somebody who is not very mature, doesn't have very mature ideas about things, you could actually term that person as kiddish. You could say something like, you have such kiddish ideas, or you're being so kiddish, or you're behaving so kiddish, which means you're essentially behaving and acting like a child when you are not a child. So it's okay for a child to be kiddish because it's their age to be kiddish, but when an adult behaves like a child, then he's acting kiddish. Well, moving on, the next one, might. This one can be very confusing, so I'm going to explain to you in great detail. So a mite is actually a little child who's a little pitiful or a little malnourished, a little helpless. So when an adult behaves like a pitiful, helpless person, that's when you term the adult as a mite. So if someone's really indulging in self-pity and self-sympathy and acting all helpless, despite the fact that they're very well capable of taking care of themselves, you could just say something like, oh, don't be such a poor mite, get your act together. And then this term would be really appropriate for them. So that's the meaning of mite, someone who's behaving pitiful, pathetic, helpless, and that may not be so actually. They could actually be well capable of taking care of themselves, but they're just acting it out like a helpless child, and then that adult would be termed as a pitiful mite. Well, moving on, I have my last two words on the list, and this one's tattletale, the other one's teeny bopper. Now, tattletale is a whole lot of fun. Now, tattletale actually means someone who's constantly complaining. Now, I'm sure you've met many tattletales in your life. So a tattletale is actually derived from like a classroom environment where children are sitting, and if one child offends the other, the first one is quick to go and complain to the teacher and say that, you know what, this was done to me. So someone who's constantly complaining, someone who's not handling his or her problems on their own, but seeking out authority or seeking out help from someone else for the same. So, well, if you have a friend who's always telling on you, or if you have a sibling who's always telling on you, you could say like, you know, my brother is such a tattletale. Every time I say something to him, he has to go and complain to my mother. Now, this is very relevant to children. But when you grow up and you continue to behave like a tattletale, like you continue to complain against somebody, to somebody, that's when you are termed as a tattletale. So you could say something like, my colleague from the first floor is such a tattletale. If I say something against the boss, she's the first one to go and actually tell him. So, well, that's what a tattletale is. Somebody who tells on someone else, somebody who complains against someone else, and essentially somebody who's not so pleasant. So make sure you never indulge in being a tattletale. Now, moving on, the last one on my list, and this one's famous as can be, teeny bopper. Now, someone who's teeny bopper means someone who's really teenagey, someone who's into like teenage fashion, teenage music, teenage words, teenage slang, all of the things that are relevant to people who are in their teenage. But imagine if you're a grown-up, like let's say you're in your 40s, late 40s or early 50s, and you still want to dress like Hannah Montana, you want to hum the songs that Hannah Montana sings, or you want to use words as if you're fresh out of middle school, then you would be termed as a teeny bopper. Acting like a teenager. So I could actually use the word teeny bopper in a sentence like, Sally, have you checked her wardrobe? It's the wardrobe of a teeny bopper, which means Sally does not dress according to her age. She dresses like a teenager. Or something like, where do you get all this teeny bopper language from? You're a mature professional. Please speak formal language. So if you're using too many teeny bopper words, you're definitely going to hear this. So, well, that's teeny bopper for you, and I'm going to go over my list one more time. There's mama's boy, who's overly dependent on his mother no matter what his age. There's daddy's girl, for whom daddy is an absolute ideal, her absolute visionary god to speak. And of course, there's crybaby, someone who cries too easily, does not practice the correct amount of emotional control. And fidget, someone who's restless, moves continuously. Kiddish, someone who acts childish all the time. And mite, someone who appears to be pitiful and helpless but may not be. And the second last one, tattletale, someone who's always complaining. And teeny bopper, where someone's acting like a teenager when they're definitely not one. Well, these are the terms used to describe childish adults, and I'm hoping that you can actually use these terms and relate them to different people in your environment, because come to think of it, we see childish adults all the time. I hope you liked the lesson, and if you have something to say to me, do write in the comment box below. This is me, Rima, saying thank you and have a great time.